Hi guys, it's Debbie, and as the other day I randomly watched the one Bong Joon Ho film I hadn't seen yet and I completed all of his filmography, I decided to make a ranking of all his films, which is quite hard as he hasn't really ever made a bad film. And I'm doing this although he is very much still in the middle of his career. In 2027 we should see his animated debut with a film about a squid who wants to be in a documentary, but then an aircraft crashes into the ocean and disrupts her peace. Actually, by the time you're watching this video, the film might even have been released. Bong Joon Ho is one of the most popular directors and also one of the most popular Korean directors in the Western world. If you're here watching this video, it's probably because you already have some interest in South Korean cinema, some knowledge about it, but for the average moviegoer out there, if we look at the numbers in terms of popularity, it's basically Bong Joon Ho and Park Chan-wook who are mostly known in the West. I'm sure Parasite was the first Korean film for many people, so hopefully today I can share some interest in some of his other lesser known films inspired by the director's words. Once you overcome the 1-inch barrier of subtitles, you'll be introduced to so many more amazing movies. Don't worry, this video won't contain spoilers, and I will be covering his feature films. He has made quite a few shorter chapters within anthology films, and he has, as many directors at the beginning of his career, made quite a few short films. But if you do have the chance, I would recommend checking them out because they do already contain many of his trademarks, and they're also very entertaining. There's even one about a man running around town trying to get to a toilet to poop, but everything gets in his way. Right, it's hard to decide where to start, but let's kick off at the bottom with Mickey 17, director Bong's most recent movie set in a dystopian future in which Robert Pattinson stars as an expendable, a disposable worker doing dangerous jobs who is cloned every time he dies to have an infinite supply of labor. But one day an incident happens and we end up with 2 clones living at the same time. Not good. Now this might all sound very familiar if you've already seen the film High Life, in which Robert Pattinson already played basically a criminal who serves his sentence by being sent into space where they carry out jobs and are subjected to experiments and where relationships are forbidden. See how familiar this all sounds? Just as in many other Bong works, we have again the struggle of the working class forced to humiliate themselves to sell themselves to the wealthier class, the wake up, work, die, repeat cycle, the monsters and creatures that he loves, crazy leaders. But when watching the film, I felt there was a more emphasis on the visuals rather than the actual storytelling, and the CGI was so abundant in some plots that it really dragged me out of the story, and I struggled to empathize with what the characters were going through. There was often more interest put into silly hijinks, slapstick, subplots rather than the actual threat of the story or its sense of realism, something I felt more strongly in his other movies. Bear in mind, this is all coming from a person who hasn't read the original book, Mickey 7. I have seen some reviews of people who have read it and have said it's a bit of a meh adaptation, so let me know if you have read it. I know some people, when they first approach a Bong Joon Ho film, a bit put off by the fact that they're all over the place, as they often suddenly switch in tone, switch genre, have characters behaving unexpectedly, and mix in a lot of humour into the darkest scenes. But you have to understand, and this will be an incredible simplification, that a lot of Korean cinema is like that. So the problem with Mickey 17 isn't that. I was expecting that. The problem is that compared to other Bong movies, which then draw everything together, even the most unexpected scenes, here everything kept trickling further and further away every time we added a new element, if that makes sense. I also felt like the movie reprised a little too much Snowpiercer with this frozen dystopian world in which the lower class are mistreated by the upper class. Even some of the most basic aspects of like the living quarters and the food that they eat. By the way, there are some very interesting articles about the importance and significance of food in Bong Joon Ho's movies, but that would be a topic for an entire different video. An interesting fact is that the director manages to bring his criticism of capitalism mixed with his trademark goofiness across any setting, even if it's a nice planet far away in space. I also think Bong Joon Ho saw the right thing when casting Robert Pattinson as the 2 Mickeys, as he really is a versatile actor and he even improvised many lines. Apparently the director had to stop him from making a Steve-O impression. It's not a bad film. I don't really assign numbers to films, but this I believe would be just one of those solid 3 out of 5 movies, an okay film. I would actually rewatch, and I have rewatched many of director Bong's other movies, but I don't think Mickey 17 would be one I would actively search to rewatch. Next up is Okja, a film which I did rewatch a few years after the first time I saw it. Now, Okja is probably one of the first encounters a lot of people in the West had with Bong Joon Ho, because although he was quite famous with The Host and of course Snowpiercer, Okja was released on Netflix, and back in a time in which Netflix was starting off with its streaming service, so basically we were all watching whatever was released on there. Okja follows again director Bong's criticism of capitalism, but this time taking on the subject of intensive animal farming, animal abuse, the disregard of the human-animal relationship, and evil CEOs who care more about their image than what they're doing to the world. In particular, it covers the story of a company who are breeding a new species of animal, this super pig. One of these super pigs, Okja, is taken to New York and subjected to all sorts of things, but her owner and best friend sets off on a mission to save her alongside a group of animal activists, creating a series of wild adventures. Obviously, the girl-pig relationship is very touching, and their pain is what moved most people and why many people have felt such a close connection to the movie. Their love and pain are very believable. I also found that there are some great chase sequences and crazy action sequences, but the movie also has some downsides, in particular the really exaggerated portrayal of some characters. And if you notice, the 2 films that I put at the bottom of the list are probably the ones with some of the most exaggerated characters. Now, in many of Bong's movies, we do have some very goofy, comedically ridiculous characters, often annoying, often with ridiculously funny lines and personalities, but often they don't stick out like a sore thumb with overacting, and they fit well within the rest of the plot. A famous example is the lead detective in Memories of Murder, which is basically a collection of the worst stereotypes of an incapable cop, but still within a well-written story overall. And for example, here in Okja, Tilda Swinton's evil CEO character is still very over the top, but within a reasonable manner. But the movie keeps pulling you out of the realism every single time Jake Gyllenhaal is absolutely clowning around in such an over-the-top manner, and this is especially painful when he interacts with other characters because the difference is jarring, and his character's behavior really downplays the whole of the movie's message. There are some really heartbreaking scenes of animal abuse with him with this weird voice, drunk, dancing around. Now, quick side note to this aspect: if you see Bong Joon Ho's list of favourite films or the films that influenced him, one of the ones he quotes is Fargo, which is this incredibly dark crime and murder story, but in which the characters behave in a nearly comical way, something I think he might have drawn inspiration for some of his characters. Their delivery and lines are so unexpected for the genre, but they never annoy you. There's never one single character going way over the top. But I digress. Okja, of course, also suffers a bit with the CGI because of how intensive it is. There are some scenes in which the super pig doesn't feel real at all, but the movie is still very good. I just don't resonate with it as much as other films on today's list, some of which are some of the best films ever made in general. I definitely don't agree with the people who literally said you don't have a heart if you don't like this film. Next up is Barking Dogs Never Bite, director Bong's directorial debut, something which is always very interesting to see where their career led them, to see whether they're already some of their trademarks back in the day. Well, this film has plenty, if not all of them: social inequalities, the struggle of the poor which leads them to embark on crazy situations, the tone shifts with sudden absurd sequences, characters who behave unpredictably, and a lot of dark humour. In this case, the premise is a man who is annoyed by his neighbour's dogs barking and decides to deal with it in his own way, something which leads him to even wilder consequences. This premise was apparently inspired by director Bong's own childhood, in which he found a dead dog in his apartment building. He was scared the security guards would eat it, and part of the film is actually set in one of the apartment buildings in which the director lived. One thing I wanted to point out is how many very early concepts here then stuck with the director years later, especially the idea of showing class division through physical locations. For example, in this movie we have the basement concept, something which is often then repeated, where people dwell and dark things happen while above them the rich go about their day oblivious. obvious. And on the contrary of films like Mickey 17, in which I expected Robert Pattinson's character to be the likable hero, the protagonist in Barking Dogs Never Bite is very unlikable. Although we can understand his situation, he does some pretty nasty things. His wife is also not a very nice person. We have other characters like friends bickering. These are people that you could have and have probably met in real life. These are real people. And because of how the story evolves, you can't even begin to predict how on earth it's going to play out. Every interaction is unique, interesting, unexpected. I know many people say that this is his weakest film, and it does have its flaws. I don't think the production design is obviously as fancy as his later movies, especially the action and chase scenes with no dialogue do go on a little too long. But considering the fact that it was made on a very, very low budget with lesser known actors, with basically no CGI, I think actually none at all. I think the first time he ever used visual effects was years later with The Host. This story still kept me hooked from the beginning right until the very end. Next, we have another film which might have been inspired by the director's own personal life, as apparently during high school he saw a monster, something, climbing along the pillar and falling into a river. And so of course I'm talking about The Host, in which a girl is attacked by a monstrous creature dwelling in the Han River in Seoul. The story is also inspired by the director's love for Godzilla and his desire to make a monster movie, something which he said was a lacking theme in Korean cinema, and of course his love for Guillermo del Toro and its creatures. And while now, a whopping 20 years later, we still get CGI blended in a grey dark mess to hide it all, in The Host the monster is out in plain daylight in all its glory. Okay, the CGI is a bit aged, but still today we have massive studios with massive budgets still blundering the CGI. In my opinion, it wasn't too bad for its time. The creature was actually designed by the same people who had worked on The Lord of the Rings and Narnia around the same time. In The Host, the girl's family starts a frantic search to save the daughter, leading them to uncover much more and also meeting once again a series of obstacles. But I'm not going to go too in depth to not spoil the movie. Let's just say that instead of going with the usual straightforward monster genre, Bong also includes social criticism. There are a lot of environmental concerns, as one of the events that inspired the making of this film was the McFarland incident, as well as a good sprinkle of dark humour, which is typical of his. Nowadays, The Host is still considered one of the best monster and sci-fi horror movies, even if back in the day the director was discouraged from making it by people close to him who said it might be considered childish. It's a good thing that he did go ahead with it. I know that now Universal has bought the rights to a remake of The Host, so who knows how that will play out. Next up is Snowpiercer, director Bong's first English language film, and which I was so annoyed when I first watched it because for some reason I thought it wasn't good and I delayed watching it, but it really is. It is based on the French graphic novel Transpierce. Let me know if it's a faithful adaptation. Apparently, director Bong found it at a bookshop and read it all in one go while standing up in front of the bookshelf. Actually, I should check if my library has it. It is set on board a train running through a dystopian frozen world where what is left of society has completely broken down into a class system. The elite live at the front of the train in luxury, while the lower class is marginalized at the carriages in the back, which again is another great way to use physical barriers to show class divide. And they are cold, starving, dirty, until one day they decide to rebel against the system and try to break through to the front. So there is a lot of action, but also a lot of confronting the reality of class division and privilege. Also, there is of course some exposition, otherwise the reason why this train is traveling, the reason why the world is like this, so it wouldn't be clear, you wouldn't understand much, but at the same time it doesn't bore you down with over exposition and lets you build the lore, the reasons why you think these characters might be in the position they are. I have no clue why I thought this film wasn't going to be good. I hadn't even seen the trailer. I think I'd just seen the poster with Chris Evans. Maybe that was the reason, but once again, he proves he is able to do good, interesting roles. Even director Bong himself said he had some misconceptions about Evans and in the end was so pleased to have worked with him. And although the movie is set all within the space of one very long train, every carriage they move through has an interesting setting and every character they encounter is unique. Literally, if Bong Joon Ho is known for whiplashes and unexpected plot elements, well, here you don't know what's going to happen in the next carriage. Imagine me, who hadn't even seen the trailer. Basically, I was discovering everything along with the characters. There was incredible realism in the way the train was made, which genuinely made you feel as if you were on board and not within a studio setting. Apparently, it was incredibly challenging to build that. In addition to that, there were also challenges with studio executives wanting the movie cut down with more action, less dialogue, but Bong's version was eventually released uncut. I also know they recently made a Netflix series adaptation, which I think Bong was even involved in, but I haven't seen that. But moving up on the podium in third place is Mother, a film which I think I was particularly drawn to because of my love for dark crime thriller stories, especially when they're not trying to shock you in a performative manner, just trying to be as morbid and dark as possible. I've recently spoken about 8mm with Nicolas Cage, which does exactly that, but rather I like a story in which mixes very dark elements with realistic characters, with realistic behaviors, with people that genuinely make you think, or that might have understandable behaviors, or could be people in your life, for how dark and messed up that may be. In this case, the protagonists are a mentally disabled young man who is accused of a horrible crime, and his mother who will stop at nothing to prove his innocence. The movie already opens with her being overbearing and overprotected of him, even in the case of bad behavior, and when he is arrested, the whole thing blows completely out of proportion. Of course, I won't spoil how the movie ends, but the whole story just keeps you guessing. It never serves you an answer on a silver platter, and it very wonderfully manages to portray the desperate, exaggerated, blind reaction that can come from a parent when their child is in trouble. I don't think there's a relationship stronger than the parent-child one, even if it sometimes crosses over onto the unhealthy side. This film could have easily simplified it all and focused just on the gross aspects of the investigation just to shock you, and make the mother-child relationship something much more straightforward and not as well written, with all the doubts and thoughts that go through our protagonist's mind. With all the genres that director Bong has covered up until now, I think that thrillers are where he excels the most, and looking again at his list of favourite films, or the films that inspired him, there are many dark crime thrillers like Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure, which for me is one of the greatest thriller movies ever made. Then he listed The Silence of the Lambs, for which I also have some similar thoughts. He has also said that Martin Scorsese is one of his favourite directors, but now we have first and second place, and we are left with two very big movies, Memories of Murder and Parasite. And I didn't know how to place them. I thought about it for a very long time, and although it sounds very predictable, I think Parasite deserves the first place, as it is the coronation of every Bong trademark. We'll get to that in a moment, because now let's speak in second place at the very well-deserved Memories of Murder, for which a lot of what I said about Mother and about Bong's talent with thrillers can be applied here. Memories of Murder is considered one of the best crime thrillers ever made. It's actually based on a true crime. You can read about it. It's very dark stuff. In the movie, a series of brutal crimes are being investigated by a team who do it in all the wrong way, with evidence tampered with, statements obtained in the wrong way, people jump into conclusions, and people jumping in general. But as the time goes by, the situation gets more and more serious, and if you've seen the film, you will know it ends with one of the greatest shots in film history. As a person who loves well-written crime thrillers, this movie ticks all the boxes. It doesn't hesitate to show us the darker, gruesome nature of the crimes, but while having characters and locations which actually look real. I've walked through fields in the years after watching Memories of Murder, and I felt uneasy out there. As I was mentioning right at the beginning of this video, some of the characters have very exaggerated traits, personalities, the way they talk, but this doesn't ever undermine the whole nature of the story, never downplays the crimes. We have characters who genuinely have funny lines, they have funny situations, but the movie never lets us forget the seriousness of the actual topic. If you haven't seen this film and you like Zodiac, Seven, Prisoners, and are fed up with those usual lists of crime thrillers you should watch, then this is the film for you. And now, Parasite, the film with which most people have got to know the name Bong Joon Ho. It absolutely smashed it at the Oscars, with which I have a love-hate relationship, but which in the end I'm happy led more people to discover in this director. Parasite is the story of a family living in pretty bad poverty who, one by one, start infiltrating a really wealthy family by deceiving them or working for them. This film, as I was mentioning earlier, is probably the coronation of all of Bong Joon Ho's trademark, what makes a film. Here's everything we've analysed about him. We have the class divide with the rich family who maintain all their appearances, and the people working for them, who in the movie are clearly said to smell. They're humiliated, they are shown living underground, they are treated only as servants. We have a lot of irony and humour and generally funny scenes, but juxtaposed with some really dark moments. We have the loser protagonists who take one simple idea and blow it completely out of proportion, leading it to a crazy eventful situation. We have a storyline which you could absolutely never predict, again with a mix of genres. The class divide is again shown even through physical means, not only the way that the lower class literally live lower, but often certain physical barriers in the movie like stairs and walls will completely cut off and separate the two families. And the whole movie manages to blend this so perfectly that it never ever bores you. It has you locked in from the opening right until the end. There is no time wasted, no scene that feels unnecessary, no character that doesn't add something to the plot. I can't lie, this is one of the best films ever made, and I genuinely can't think of any way to improve it. I mean, even the fact that the half of the house was made in CGI and none of us even noticed proves how well done it was. It was very sad when Lee Sung-kyun, who plays the rich father in the film, sadly passed away. He committed suicide, which put a big spotlight on the immense pressure that there is in the South Korean entertainment industry, following even multiple celebrity suicides. It was a very dark situation. I'd also seen him in another great Korean movie, A Hard Day, and with that sad news, we can only learn to be kinder to one another, and as film fans we'll forever be grateful for the great role he left us with. And to wrap up now this very lengthy video, I would love to hear what you think about Bong Joon Ho, about his films. If you agree with my ranking, what's your favourite film by this great director? Let me know everything with a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.